A yellowed envelope slid from the silverware crate and stopped beneath my shoe. I froze, one hand still wrapped around a cold brass candlestick, while the mansion's freight elevator groaned behind me. Dust floated through the narrow beam of my flashlight. The basement smelled of cedar, furniture polish, and damp stone. Nothing like the lemon wax and white roses upstairs, where wealthy guests left fingerprints on crystal glasses and never learned my name. I was Nia to the payroll office. To everyone else, I was Maid, you, or the snap of two impatient fingers. I bent down and lifted the envelope. Inside was a folded brochure from the Second Chance Correspondence Program, its paper soft at the creases. Right T.O., someone the world has forgotten, the cover said. A paper-clipped list named prisoners who had requested letters. Most entries carried neat blue check marks. One had none. Daniel Reed. No visitors. No approved contacts. No outgoing correspondence. The bare lines held my eyes longer than they should have. Upstairs, a bell chimed through the service panel. Once, then twice. Someone wanted something carried, polished, poured, or erased. I slipped the brochure into my apron and finished stacking the crate, but Daniel's empty row followed me through the rest of my shift. It stayed with me while a dinner guest handed me his stained napkin without looking away from his phone. It stayed when another man placed an empty glass on my tray and said, "That's what you're here for." By midnight, the chandeliers had gone dark. The marble floors held the faint chill of winter, and a last dishwasher rattled behind the kitchen doors. I sat alone at the servant's table beneath a buzzing fluorescent tube. My fingers smelled of bleach. A sheet of cream stationery waited before me, discarded from the household office because the family crest had been printed slightly off-center. I wrote, "Dear Mr. Reed," then stopped. Every question that came to mind sounded like a locked door. What did you do? How long are you serving? Are you innocent? Those were not greetings. They were demands for a confession from a stranger who had asked only not to disappear. I crossed out nothing because I had written nothing else. The clock clicked above the pantry. Somewhere in the walls, old pipes shuddered. I thought of all the rooms I entered without being noticed and all the conversations that continued as if I were part of the furniture. Then I lowered my pen. "Dear Mr. Reed, my name is Nia. I don't know what brought you to prison, and I won't ask unless you choose to tell me. I only want to ask something no one seems to ask anymore. When was the last time someone treated you like a human being?" The ink gleamed beneath the fluorescent light. My hand hovered over the signature. Writing to a prisoner could cost me more than embarrassment if the household discovered it. Private staff were expected to keep their lives quiet, clean, and convenient. But silence had a cost, too. I signed only Nia, folded the page, and sealed it before caution could borrow someone else's voice. Outside, the brass mail slot was rimmed with frost. The envelope made a dry whisper as it vanished into the darkness. 3 days later, hundreds of miles away, a guard pushed it through a steel opening into a silent cell. The man registered as Daniel Reed stared at my handwriting without touching it. No one had written to him in 11 months. And whoever Nia was, she had just asked the one question he had spent years making sure nobody dared to ask. Fluorescent light hummed above the steel bunk, bleaching the cell of every color except the blue ink on the envelope. Daniel Reed held the page between both hands, testing the paper as though it might conceal a blade. Then his thumb found the fold. One pull would have split Nia's question in half. Instead, he lowered the letter and read it again. She had not asked what he had done. She had not asked whether he was innocent, dangerous, rich, or worth saving. Beyond the reinforced door, boots struck concrete in measured intervals, and somewhere down the tier, a man shouted into silence. Daniel crossed to the narrow desk and placed the letter beneath his metal cup. Keeping it was a decision. Answering it would cost him something more carefully guarded than freedom. 3 nights later, a single sheet left his cell. "I don't remember," he wrote beneath the name Daniel Reed, "but I remember the last time someone pretended." The reply reached the mansion on a rain-dark afternoon. Nia opened it in the servants' laundry room, where dryers thudded against the walls and hot air smelled of starch and lavender detergent. She traced the severe, disciplined handwriting, then sat on an overturned linen basket. Her next letter did not offer pity. It described a dinner party where a guest had snapped his fingers at her without looking away from his wineglass. He asked the room for another drink, she wrote, as if the room itself had hands. Daniel read those words under the cold glare of inspection lights. Once, a gesture from him had made armed men stand straighter. Now guards spoke over him while checking his cell, treating his silence as emptiness. He understood the injury hidden inside Nia's quiet sentence. "People confuse service with surrender," he replied. "They are not the same." Winter softened into spring. Letters crossed hundreds of miles in canvas mail sacks, carrying pieces of 2 lives no visitor had been permitted to see. Nia wrote about polishing a marble staircase while guests debated whether maids should be allowed to use the front entrance. Daniel wrote that locked doors were honest. At least, they never claimed exclusion was courtesy. She told him about finding a cashmere coat thrown across a wet floor because its owner assumed someone invisible would lift it. He confessed that he had once measured respect by how quickly a room obeyed him. "Obedience is loud," he wrote. "Respect usually enters without making a sound." With each response, his words lost their armor. He admitted that darkness made the cell feel smaller, that he slept facing the door, that 11 months without a letter had taught him how completely a man could disappear while remaining alive. In return, Nia stopped signing merely out of kindness. She began waiting for his envelopes. At the mansion, silver clinked beneath chandeliers while she counted the days between mail deliveries. In prison, Daniel refused recreation twice so he could finish replies before collection, surrendering the 1 hour when sunlight warmed the concrete yard. By the 11th month, her letters were stacked beneath his mattress, their edges softened by his hands. Then one evening, a guard slid Nia's newest envelope through the opening and remained outside the cell. "You've got someone asking questions about your mail, Reed." Daniel's pen stopped above an unfinished sentence. The corridor smelled of bleach and cold metal. For the first time since Nia had written to him, no reply left his cell. Weeks passed. Her mailbox stayed empty. And with every silent morning, Nia became less willing to accept that the man behind those letters had simply vanished. Rain tapped against the mansion's service entrance as a cream-colored envelope slid through the brass mail slot and landed unanswered on the tile. It was Nia's 3rd letter returned unopened. The paper felt damp and cold beneath her fingers, and the red stamp across Daniel Reed's name offered no explanation beyond delivery restricted. By noon, she had called the prison twice. By sunset, she had signed a visitor application, surrendered her social security number, and accepted the warning that unauthorized contact with an inmate could cost her the job that provided both her wages and her room above the mansion's garage. 11 days later, beneath the hard white glare of the prison lobby, Nia placed her shoes, purse, and brass house keys into a gray plastic tray. A correctional officer searched the seams of her coat while steel doors slammed deeper inside the building. Each impact traveled through the concrete floor. "Once you enter, you follow every instruction," the officer said. Nia signed the final form. "Then let me in." Daniel had refused the visit twice before a lieutenant informed him that another refusal would trigger a review of his correspondence privileges. When guards brought him into the visitation room, his wrists were unrestrained, but 2 officers remained beside the door. Thick glass divided the room. Black telephones hung from scratched metal panels, and the air smelled of disinfectant and burnt coffee. Nia recognized him first by the stillness. In his letters, Daniel had confessed to sleeping toward the door and measuring danger by changes in sound. Now his eyes counted the cameras, the guards, the distance between exits, then settled on her. She lifted the receiver. "You disappeared." His hand closed around the phone at the other side of the glass. "You shouldn't have come." The voice was low, cold, and controlled, nothing like the uncertain lines written beneath the name Daniel Reed. It carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed before he finished speaking. "That isn't an answer," Nia said. "It's the only one that keeps you safe. You don't get to decide that after a year of asking me to tell the truth." His gaze sharpened. Then it dropped to the small silver crest pinned to her coat. a crest worn by every member of the mansion staff. Adrian knew it. Years earlier, that estate had hosted meetings for men who never wrote their real names on guest lists. He remembered the marble foyer, the walnut-paneled library, and the servants instructed to move through both as silently as shadows. Nia worked inside a house once connected to his network. Someone close enough to monitor his mail might also be close enough to watch her. The telephone creaked beneath his grip. "Do you still work at the Hawthorne estate?" Nia's eyes narrowed. She had never written the mansion's name, never described the crest, never mentioned her employer. "How do you know where I work?" A guard glanced toward the clock. 2 minutes remained. Adrian could have warned her. He could have spoken a name that had once made powerful men lower their voices. Instead, he reached for the identity prison walls had given him. Some houses are recognizable, not from a button. 1 minute. Nia leaned closer until her reflection touched his in the glass. "Who are you, Daniel?" The final buzzer cut through the room. Guards moved toward him, keys rattling against black belts. Adrian returned the receiver with deliberate care, but his eyes never left hers. "Go back to the mansion," he said, "and don't tell anyone you came here." The line went dead. Nia remained seated as he was led through the steel door. In the corridor beyond the glass, Adrian turned once and saw that she had not moved. For the first time, the woman who had treated him like a human being was looking at him as a man with something to hide, and he had just sent her back into the one place he no longer trusted. The grandfather clock struck 10, each bronze note rolling through the mansion's marble corridors. Cold morning light sharpened the edges of Victor Hale's desk, where a cream prison envelope lay beneath his manicured hand. Nia stopped in the doorway. Her coat was still damp from the bus ride back, and the faint smell of disinfectant clung to her uniform. Victor turned the envelope over, exposing her name beside the prison's black cancellation stamp. "You visited him." His voice was quieter than the clock. Nia noticed the envelope had been opened with a silver letter knife. "That was addressed to me. Everything entering this house concerns me." Victor rose, smoothing his charcoal vest. "Daniel Reed is not some lonely charity case. He is a dangerous criminal, and you brought his attention to this property." Nia held his gaze. "How do you know what kind of man he is?" For one beat, the radiator hissed beneath the window. Victor's thumb pressed hard against the envelope. "Pack your things. You're dismissed effective immediately." By noon, her uniforms had been folded into a cardboard box. Staff members lowered their eyes as she crossed the service hall, where copper pans gleamed above the ovens and roasted coffee scented the warm air. Victor waited beside the rear door with her final paycheck. "You will surrender every letter." "No." The single word landed between them. His jaw tightened. Nia took the check but left his hand empty. At the basement stairs, she remembered Adrian's warning, "Go back to the mansion." The urgency in his voice now sounded less like control and more like recognition. Instead of leaving, she carried her box toward the laundry room, then slipped through the accounting office while Victor escorted a delivery crew upstairs. Fluorescent tubes buzzed over steel filing cabinets. The room smelled of toner and hot dust. Nia had spent years sorting receipts no guest ever noticed, and she knew Victor kept the charitable trust records in a locked walnut drawer. The key hung inside an unlocked supply cabinet because men like Victor rarely imagined the maid was watching. She found 12 transfers from the mansion's children's foundation into consulting companies bearing the same mailing address. Victor's authorization marked every page. Nia did not stop to interpret them. She copied each sheet, the machine flashing white across her face, then returned the originals in exact order. Footsteps struck the corridor. She slid the copies beneath the lining of her box as the handle turned. Victor entered, his cologne cutting through the paper-dry air. "You were told to leave." Nia lifted the box. "I was collecting what belongs to me." Outside, February wind drove against her cheeks. At a corner shipping store, she placed the documents inside a rigid envelope addressed to Daniel Reed, adding only one sentence in the handwriting Adrian had learned to recognize. "You knew this house was dangerous. Tell me why." She paid cash, requested track delivery, and watched the clerk seal it. Across the street, a black sedan pulled away from the curb without signaling. That evening, inside the prison mailroom, the envelope was scanned, stamped, and diverted from Daniel's regular tray. A corrections officer carried it through a secured door to a windowless office, where Victor Hale was already waiting on the telephone. The tracking receipt in Nia's pocket said her package had been delivered. It did not say into whose hands. Fluorescent light hummed above the prison interview room, bleaching the steel table the color of old bone. The vent breathed air that smelled of disinfectant and wet concrete. Nia entered with an empty canvas bag on her shoulder and the tracking receipt folded inside her coat pocket. Across the reinforced glass, Daniel Reed was already waiting. No letter lay before him, only his cuffed hands. "The package never reached you," she said. His eyes settled on the receipt she pressed against the glass. "No." The single word landed harder than an excuse. "Then tell me who knew it was coming." A guard shifted near the door, keys scraping against his belt. Daniel glanced at him and raised the telephone receiver. "My name isn't Daniel Reed." Nia did not reach for her own receiver until the guard stepped back. The plastic felt cold against her palm. "My name is Adrian," he continued. "I ran an organization that owned pieces of that mansion's security, transportation, and accounts. Victor Hale worked inside that network. Outside, freezing rain ticked against the narrow window like fingernails. Nia's grip tightened, but her voice remained level. "You let me write to a man who didn't exist." Daniel existed in those letters. Adrian leaned closer, the chain between his wrists whispering over steel. But the man answering them was a Mafia boss. For 11 months, his handwriting had crossed the distance between them without rank, guards, or armed men. Now every page seemed to carry a shadow behind the ink. "Did you use me?" she asked. "No." His answer came without hesitation. "That is why you have to disappear." Adrian instructed her to leave the city before nightfall, abandon her phone, and use cash. He named a bus terminal 40 miles west where someone loyal to him could provide a new identity. Each direction arrived cold and exact, spoken with the authority of a man accustomed to moving people like pieces on a board. "Victor intercepted the evidence," he said. "Once he learns you kept copies, he won't stop." Nia rose. The chair legs shrieked across the floor. Adrian's expression changed for the first time. "Sit down." "No." She placed the receiver back against her ear, but remained standing. "You warned me about that house. You should have trusted me with the reason. I'm trying to keep you alive. By deciding where I go, what name I use, and whether I'm allowed to speak." Her eyes held his through the scratched glass. "My kindness is not permission for any man, even one who calls himself a protector, to control my life." Adrian froze mid-breath. Nia unfolded a second receipt. That morning, before entering the prison, she had walked into a federal law office downtown. Sunlight had flashed across the building's brass seal. Inside, the lobby smelled of coffee and polished stone. She had placed duplicate bank records before a federal attorney, signed a sworn statement, and surrendered the original flash drive she had concealed inside the lining of her work shoe. The attorney warned that filing under her real name could expose her to subpoenas, public scrutiny, and retaliation. Nia signed anyway. "The evidence is no longer yours to protect or Victor's to bury," she said. "It's in federal custody." For years, Adrian's orders had closed restaurants, moved fortunes, and emptied rooms. This woman had answered his command by stepping beyond his reach. A warning buzzer sounded, harsh and metallic. The guard approached. Adrian lifted his receiver once more. "When Victor realizes what you've done, your name will become the only door left for him to break. Nia geldhe imtibek. Then you'd better decide whether the man who wrote those letters is willing to tell the truth where everyone can hear it." The steel door opened, spilling white corridor light across the floor. She walked out without taking the escape he had offered. Behind the glass, Adrian remained seated as the line went dead, staring at the telephone while one choice tightened around him. Preserve the empire that had taught him to command, or expose it before Victor destroyed the woman who had refused to obey him. By sunrise, photocopied pages were sliding beneath apartment doors, curling against rain-dark sidewalks, and glowing across phone screens under Victor Hale's carefully chosen headline: Maid's secret correspondence with crime boss. The paper smelled of wet ink. The screenshots were worse. Victor had removed every line in which Nia challenged Adrian and preserved every sentence in which she offered compassion to Daniel Reed. By 8 o'clock, strangers were calling her kindness conspiracy. At 9, the manager of the mansion informed her that no reference would be provided. At noon, her landlord stood beneath the flickering hallway light, holding a 30-day notice between two fingers. "Other tenants are frightened," he said, avoiding her eyes. Nia looked past him at the apartment she had paid for with 12 years of polished silver, burned fingertips, and swollen feet. They weren't frightened yesterday. His keys clicked against his belt. Yesterday, they hadn't read the letters. By evening, a grocery clerk recognized her and quietly closed the register. Two women near the freezer aisle whispered while cold air drifted around Nia's ankles. She set down her bread and walked out with her shoulders level, though the automatic doors opened onto a wall of camera flashes. "Were you recruiting for Adrian?" someone shouted. "How much did he pay you?" Nia stopped beneath the blue-white parking lot lamps and faced the microphones. "He never paid me." Rain gathered along her eyelashes. "I wrote to a lonely prisoner because loneliness does not erase someone's humanity. Whatever Adrian has done belongs to him. My name belongs to me." 40 miles away, a corrections officer placed the broadcast tablet against the glass of Adrian's cell. The concrete smelled of bleach, and metal doors slammed down the corridor like distant gunshots. On screen, Nia stood alone while strangers turned her private words into evidence. A federal prosecutor entered moments later carrying 2 folders. The thin one contained an agreement, amended testimony, limited cooperation, and a path to early release. The thick one held the financial ledgers of Adrian's organization, the accounts, shell companies, protected names, and transactions capable of dismantling everything he had built. "Sign the first," the prosecutor said, "and you may walk out before winter." Adrian's gaze remained on Nia's frozen image. And her. Victor's version survives unless we can prove she had no operational role. The ventilation system breathed cold air across the table. Adrian opened the thick folder. Every page cost him territory, loyalty, and the authority that had once made men lower their voices when he entered a room. He signed a release beneath his true name, then pushed the ledger across the steel. "Enter all of it into the record." The prosecutor stared at the signature. "This will destroy your organization. That is the evidence. Your former associates will know who surrendered it." Adrian finally lifted his eyes. "Make sure they know why." Before midnight, federal officials publicly cleared Nia of criminal involvement and confirmed that her letters contained no coded instructions, payments, or conspiracy. The accusation collapsed, but the job, apartment, and neighbors did not return. In the prison yard, men who once nodded to Adrian now turned their backs. One stopped beside him as sleet clicked against the fence. "You traded an empire for a maid's reputation." Adrian folded Nia's final letter inside his coat, protecting the paper from the wet. "No," he said. "I returned what Victor stole from her." The man moved closer, his voice nearly lost beneath the wind. "Then understand the price. Victor has ordered every door outside these walls closed to you. And when you leave this place, no one from your old world will protect you." The warning bell rang. Adrian walked toward the cell block without looking back, stripped of the empire that had kept him untouchable, while somewhere beyond the razor wire, Victor learned that the prisoner he meant to silence had just placed an entire criminal kingdom in the government's hands. Fluorescent light hummed above the federal evidence room, bleaching the steel table until every scratch looked carved in ice. An air vent breathed cold air across a clear plastic sleeve containing Nia's confiscated letters, their paper edges softened by a year of handling. The federal prosecutor slid the sleeve toward her, then placed Adrian's surrendered ledgers beside it. "Victor altered the dates before releasing these," she said. "We need you to identify what was changed." Nia pulled her chair closer. The plastic crackled beneath her fingertips, and the room carried the dry smell of toner and cardboard. She did not search for another secret. She studied what she already knew better than anyone: Adrian's handwriting. His earliest replies leaned hard to the right, each word pressed deep enough to scar the paper beneath it. Later letters sat lighter on the page. The sentences had shortened. The threats hidden between ordinary words had disappeared. Nia arranged the originals by date, then aligned them with prison intake logs and the charity records she had copied from Victor's office. A pattern emerged, not from some unfamiliar code, but from the way Adrian's hand had changed after each of her letters. "This one came before I first wrote to him," she said, touching a page filled with names and prison housing numbers. "And these entries aren't business accounts." The prosecutor followed her finger. Every name connected to Adrian's former network had been matched with a prison employee, a transfer request, or a payment authorized through one of Victor's companies. At the center stood the name of Adrian's younger brother, followed by a date marked 6 months before Adrian entered custody. Behind reinforced glass at the prison, a recording light glowed red. Adrian sat with both hands visible on the metal table while sleet rattled the narrow window. Nia entered carrying copies of the pages. She remained standing. "You weren't captured," she said. "You arranged your own arrest." Adrian's jaw tightened, but he did not deny it. The room smelled of wet concrete and burnt coffee. "My brother trusted someone inside my organization," he said. "That trust got him killed. I entered under Daniel Reed because the man responsible was using prison transfers to erase everyone who could identify him. His plan had been simple enough to fit inside one sentence: draw the traitor close, learn his name, then leave prison and take revenge." Nia placed the later letters over the first, letting Adrian see the transformation in his own hand. "Then why did the list stop?" For several seconds, only the vent answered. Adrian looked down at the final name he had crossed out months earlier. "Because you kept writing to Daniel as if he could still become someone Adrian had never allowed himself to be. He had abandoned the killings before surrendering his ledgers. That choice had not erased his crimes, but it had changed what he intended to do next." Nia opened the charity records and laid Victor's shell company address beside the transfer payments. The numbers matched. Victor had betrayed Adrian's brother, then used prison officials to isolate Adrian and arrange his death where it could be dismissed as inmate violence. The prosecutor entered, carrying a signed detention order. "Your documents complete the chain," she told Nia. "Victor Hale is being taken into federal custody tonight." Nia did not look away from Adrian. By placing the records in government hands, she had done what his empire could not: expose the traitor without becoming an executioner. Adrian rose as the guard unlocked the door. "If Victor talks," the prosecutor said, "your custody status changes immediately." Beyond the glass, a telephone began ringing. No one reached for it. Adrian's old enemy was about to lose his freedom, but Adrian might soon be forced to face the unprotected world Victor had prepared for him. Cold rain whispered against the prison gate as steel locks released one after another, each metallic crack stripping away another layer of the man Adrian had once been. Dawn stained the wet pavement gray. Nia waited beyond the security barrier in a plain wool coat, her fingers resting inside one pocket around the first letter she had written to Daniel Reed. Adrian emerged carrying a clear plastic bag containing folded prison clothes and 365 envelopes bound with cotton string. "No taler suit. No armored convoy. No men lowering their eyes." The former Mafia boss stepped into the freezing air with $42, the letters, and no empire left to command. A dark sedan idled across the road. Its rear window slid down, revealing one of Adrian's former associates beneath the amber glow of a street lamp. Victor removed every safe house, every account, every loyal crew, the man called over the rain. "Come with me now, and some of the old structure can still be rebuilt." The offer hung between exhaust fumes and wet concrete. Adrian looked at the open car door, then at the prison bag cutting into his palm. Once rebuilding would have required a phone call. Now it required becoming the man those letters had persuaded him to leave behind. He crossed the road. Nia's shoulders tightened, but she did not follow. Adrian stopped beside the sedan and placed a small black notebook on its roof. "Names. Favors. Dead's powerful men still owed him. "Give this to the prosecutor," he said. The former associate stared at it. "That ends everything. That is the point." Adrian stepped back and closed the car door himself. The sedan pulled away, spraying cold water across his prison-issued shoes. By surrendering the last piece of leverage not contained in the federal ledgers, he had made rebuilding impossible. No hidden reserve remained. No secret command waited beneath his silence. Only then did Nia approach. The rain had darkened the edges of the envelope in her pocket, and Adrian noticed the familiar slant of her handwriting. "You kept the first one," she said. He raised the plastic bag. "I kept all of them." A federal prosecutor came through the gate carrying a document folder. Victor Hale had entered a cooperation agreement overnight. Adrian's false identity had been formally dissolved, and the evidence against the prison officials had ended the immediate threat to his life. The prosecutor handed him release papers smelling faintly of toner and damp cardboard. "You're free," she said, "but your testimony begins Monday. If you disappear, the agreement disappears with you." Adrian signed with a cheap blue pen. The name he wrote was not Daniel Reed. When the prosecutor left, he held the papers toward Nia as though expecting instructions. She did not take them. "I won't become your protection plan," she said. "And I won't let gratitude become another kind of obedience." A city bus groaned to the curb, warm air spilling from its folding doors. Adrian could have asked her to hide with him. He could have ordered distance, offered money, or wrapped control in gentler language. Instead, he dropped $40 into the fare box, kept 2 for himself, and bought 2 tickets. "I have no house," he said. "No organization. No name you are required to answer to." Nia studied him through the rain-speckled glass. "Then what are you offering?" Adrian set the bag of letters between them and chose the cracked vinyl seat across from hers, leaving the space beside her untouched. "The truth when you ask for it, and the right to walk away when you don't." The doors folded shut with a hiss. As the prison receded behind them, Nia drew the first envelope from her pocket but did not hand it over. Tomorrow would mark 1 year since she had written to a lonely stranger. For the first time, Adrian would have to decide what to write when there were no bars to blame for his silence. The scratch of a fountain pen moved through the small kitchen while morning light spread across the scarred wooden table. Outside, tires hissed over wet pavement. Inside, coffee steamed between 2 chipped mugs, carrying the bitter smell of a life that no longer came with servants, guards, or locked doors. Adrian sat across from Nia, the canvas bag of 365 letters resting near his elbow. Monday's testimony had ended 3 hours earlier. Under oath, he had named every operation, account, and official his empire had corrupted. The federal prosecutor had accepted the final notebook. Daniel Reed had been formally erased from the record. Adrian remained, without leverage, without protection, and without another identity behind which to hide. Nia watched his pen stop above a blank sheet. "You faced a federal hearing more easily than that page," she said. "The hearing only asked what I did." His thumb pressed against the pen's ridged metal grip. "This asks who I intend to be." Nia slid the first letter from her pocket. Its folds had softened with use, and one corner bore a faint brown stain from the mansion's storage room. She placed it beside his empty page, but kept 2 fingers over it. "Before you read this again, I need to say something." The radiator clicked in silence. "I will not apologize for writing to you. Not to Victor, not to the people who call me foolish, and not to anyone who believes compassion becomes shameful when the person receiving it has done wrong." Her eyes remained steady. "But compassion is not absolution. I won't carry your guilt, rebuild your life, or become proof that you've changed." Adrian lowered the pen. "Then what can I ask of you?" "Nothing you once would have taken." Nia removed her fingers from the letter. "You can tell the truth. You can accept my answer. You can earn everything else." For a long moment, only the clock above the sink disturbed the room. Then Adrian began to write. The pen moved without the coded phrases, calculated pauses, or changing hand that Daniel Reed had used behind prison walls. When he finished, he turned the page toward her instead of sealing it. The heading read, Letter 366. Beneath it, the ink was dark and unadorned. "Nia, You once asked when I had last been treated like a human being. I did not know how to answer because I had spent years making fear look like respect. You wrote to a man you believed had nothing, and you asked for nothing in return. I answered under a false name, but the honest parts of me began there. I cannot repay your kindness by claiming you. I can only honor it by becoming accountable when no one is forcing me. If you choose to leave after reading this, I will still tell the truth tomorrow and every day after. Adrian pushed the page across the table, then stood and carried the canvas bag to the stove. From beneath the letters, he removed the last object tied to his former authority, a black signet ring bearing the crest his associates once obeyed. He set it on a steel baking tray. With a pair of pliers, he crushed the softened band until the crest split down the center. No audience watched. No empire trembled. Metal scraped metal, and the old symbol became something no one could wear again. Nia read the letter twice. Then she opened her purse, took out an envelope, and placed it before him. I wrote mine last night, she said. Adrian did not reach for it until she nodded. Inside was a single page. Dear Adrian, it began, not Daniel, not boss, not sir. Equality means I stay because I choose to, not because you rescued me or because I rescued you. Meet me here next Monday after your second testimony. Bring no promises. Bring the truth. A breath left him slowly. Nia rose, collected her first letter, and walked to the door. This time, Adrian did not command her to stay. He did not follow. At the threshold, she glanced back at the broken ring, the open letter, and the man waiting without power to guarantee her return. 1 week, she said. The door closed softly behind her. 7 days later, at the same scarred table, 2 chipped mugs sent steam into the pale morning light. Adrian arrived, carrying no guards, no gifts, and no borrowed name. Nia pulled out the chair across from hers. He sat only after she invited him. And that day, the man who once demanded loyalty finally learned that dignity begins where control ends.